The cold metal of the car door pressed against John Smith's cheek as he stirred from his restless slumber. His eyes fluttered open, momentarily confused by the cramped surroundings. For a fleeting second, he expected to wake up in his plush king-sized bed, silk sheets caressing his skin, the New York skyline greeting him through floor-to-ceiling windows. But reality crashed down hard, as it had every morning for the past 2 years. John Smith, once a titan of Wall Street, now called a beat-up 2001 Honda Civic his home. The leather seats that had once graced his corner office were a distant memory, replaced by the worn fabric of his reclined driver's seat. The smell of expensive cologne had given way to the musty odor of unwashed clothes and fast food wrappers. As he sat up, wincing at the crick in his neck, John caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. The face staring back at him was a far cry from the confident, well-groomed image that had graced the cover of Forbes just 3 years ago. His once-trimmed beard was now a scraggly mess, and dark circles underscored eyes that had lost their ambitious spark. With a heavy sigh, John reached for the dog-eared notebook on the passenger seat. Inside, scribbled in increasingly desperate handwriting, were the remnants of his former life, phone numbers of old colleagues, brainstormed business ideas, and a dwindling list of places that might offer a hot shower or a meal. As the first rays of sunlight began to illuminate the parking lot he'd called home for the night, John couldn't help but wonder, how had it all gone so wrong? And more importantly, was there any way back from rock bottom? John's story began long before that fateful morning in the parking lot. Born to working-class parents in a small Midwest town, he had always been driven by an insatiable hunger for success. His father, a factory worker, and his mother, a waitress, had instilled in him the value of hard work and the dream of a better life. John was the first in his family to attend college, earning a scholarship to an Ivy League school where he quickly distinguished himself as a brilliant mind in finance. Upon graduation, Wall Street came calling, and John answered with fervor. He climbed the corporate ladder with remarkable speed, his keen instincts and unwavering work ethic propelling him to new heights. By the age of 30, he was one of the youngest traders to make partner at his firm, with an office overlooking Central Park and a salary that would make most people's heads spin. Life seemed perfect. John had it all: the penthouse apartment, the sports car collection, the model girlfriend turned wife, and the respect of his peers. He was living the American dream, a shining example of what ambition and talent could achieve. But as the saying goes, the higher you climb, the harder you fall. The 2008 financial crisis hit like a tsunami, washing away the foundations of John's carefully constructed world. At first, he was confident he could weather the storm. After all, he had navigated turbulent markets before. But this was different. As the global economy teetered on the brink of collapse, John found himself making increasingly desperate moves to stay afloat. One fateful day, he took a massive risk on a trade, betting everything on a hunch. It was the kind of move that had made him famous in the past, but this time, luck wasn't on his side. The market shifted, and in a matter of hours, John lost not only his own fortune but a significant chunk of his clients' money as well. The fallout was swift and merciless. John was fired from his firm, his reputation in tatters. As news of his downfall spread, friends and colleagues vanished overnight. The press, once enamored with his rags-to-riches story, now painted him as a cautionary tale of greed and hubris. But the worst was yet to come. As the bills piled up and the savings dwindled, John's marriage began to crumble. His wife, accustomed to a life of luxury, couldn't handle the sudden change in their circumstances. The arguments grew more frequent and bitter until one day, she simply packed her bags and left, taking what little remained of their joint assets with her. In the span of a few short months, John Smith had lost everything: his job, his money, his home, and his wife. The man who once had the world at his feet now found himself on the streets, with nothing but the clothes on his back and a broken spirit. The first few nights of homelessness were a blur of disbelief and despair. John wandered the streets of New York, a ghost in a city that had once revered him. He slept on park benches and subway stations, always moving, always watching over his shoulder. The few possessions he had left, a change of clothes, his phone, soon to be disconnected, and his wallet, empty save for ID cards that seemed to mock his fall from grace, were clutched tightly to his chest as he tried to sleep. As weeks turned into months, John's appearance began to match his circumstances. His once designer suits were replaced by whatever he could find at donation centers. His perfectly coiffed hair grew long and unkempt, and a beard began to obscure his once familiar face. In a way, he was grateful for the change. It made him less recognizable, less likely to be spotted by someone from his old life. Depression set in, a heavy cloud that followed John wherever he went. He found himself drawn to the bottle, using what little money he could scrounge or beg to numb the pain of his fall. Alcohol became both a comfort and a curse, providing temporary relief but pushing him further into the abyss. It was during this time that John hit his lowest point. Standing on the Brooklyn Bridge one cold November night, he contemplated ending it all. The waters below seemed to call to him, promising an end to the pain and humiliation. As he gripped the railing, tears streaming down his face, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered, "Is this really how John Smith's story ends?" That moment on the bridge became a turning point. John didn't jump. Instead, he walked, for hours, until the sun began to rise over the city skyline. As the first light of dawn touched his face, he made a promise to himself. He would find a way back, no matter how long it took or how hard he had to work. The road to recovery was far from easy. John's first step was to seek help for his alcohol addiction. He found a free clinic that offered support groups and counseling. It was there, sitting in a circle of strangers who shared similar struggles, that John began to confront the demons that had driven him to the brink. One particularly cold evening, John found himself in line at a soup kitchen. As he waited for a warm meal, he struck up a conversation with the man behind him. The man, an older gentleman named Frank, had a kind face etched with wrinkles that spoke of both hardship and laughter. "First time here, son?" Frank asked, his eyes twinkling with understanding. John nodded, embarrassed. "Is it that obvious?" Frank chuckled. "We were all first-timers once. Don't worry, the food ain't half bad, and the company's even better." As they sat together over bowls of steaming soup, John found himself opening up to Frank in a way he hadn't done with anyone in years. He shared his story, the meteoric rise, the catastrophic fall, and the struggle to find purpose in his new reality. Frank listened intently, nodding at times, his face a mixture of empathy and something else. Was it admiration? When John finished, Frank leaned in close. "You know, son," he said, his voice low and sincere, "I see a lot of people come through here. Some are down on their luck, some have made bad choices. But you've got something special. I can see it in your eyes. You're not done yet." Those words, spoken by a stranger in a soup kitchen, sparked something in John. For the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for redemption. Frank became a mentor of sorts to John, introducing him to the world of volunteer work at the soup kitchen. At first, John was hesitant. He, who had once dined at Michelin-starred restaurants, was now serving meals to the homeless. But as he worked alongside the other volunteers, something unexpected happened. John found a sense of purpose he had never experienced in his high-flying Wall Street days. The gratitude in the eyes of those he served, the camaraderie among the volunteers, the feeling of making a tangible difference, it all began to fill a void in John that he hadn't even realized existed. He threw himself into the work with the same passion and dedication that had once made him a star trader. As John immersed himself in this new world, he began to see the financial struggles of those around him in a new light. He listened to stories of people living paycheck to paycheck, of families one medical emergency away from financial ruin. The more he heard, the more an idea began to form in his mind. One night, as he lay in his car, which he had managed to keep running thanks to the kindness of a local mechanic who let him work off the repairs, John scribbled furiously in his notebook. He was outlining an idea for a mobile app, one that would provide financial education and micro-lending services to low-income individuals. The concept combined his Wall Street expertise with his newfound understanding of the struggles faced by those living on the margins of society. It would be a bridge between two worlds he now knew intimately. As the idea took shape, John felt a familiar excitement building, the same rush he used to get before a big trade. But this time, it was different. This wasn't about making money for himself, it was about using his knowledge to help others avoid the pitfalls that had led to his own downfall. With renewed purpose, John began to rebuild his life piece by piece. He found a part-time job at a local coffee shop, which allowed him to rent a small room and slowly regain his footing. In his free time, he poured his energy into developing his app idea, teaching himself coding basics and refining his business plan. The journey was far from smooth. There were days when the weight of his past threatened to crush him, when the enormity of the task ahead seemed insurmountable. But each time he felt like giving up, John would remember Frank's words and the faces of those he had helped at the soup kitchen. He had come too far to turn back now. Months passed, and John's app idea began to take shape. He called it Street Smart Finance, a nod to both his Wall Street past and his time on the streets. With a prototype in hand, John knew it was time to take the next big step, seeking funding. The startup world was a far cry from the polished boardrooms of Wall Street. John found himself pitching his idea in co-working spaces, coffee shops, and even a few garages. He faced rejection after rejection, but each no only fueled his determination. Finally, after what felt like the 100th pitch, John managed to secure a spot in a prestigious startup incubator program. It was a foot in the door, a chance to refine his idea and connect with potential investors. The day of the final presentation arrived. John stood backstage, his heart pounding. He was wearing a suit for the first time in years, borrowed from a fellow volunteer at the soup kitchen. As he waited for his turn, John closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In his mind, he saw flashes of his journey, the highs of his Wall Street days, the lows of homelessness, and every step in between that had led him to this moment. Next up, John Smith, presenting Street Smart Finance, called the announcer. John walked onto the stage, facing a room full of investors, entrepreneurs, and tech enthusiasts. As he began his pitch, he felt a familiar confidence rising within him. This was his element, after all. But unlike his Wall Street days, when his words were driven by a hunger for personal gain, now they were fueled by a genuine desire to make a difference. He spoke of financial inclusion, of empowering the underserved, of using technology to break the cycle of poverty. The audience listened intently, some nodding, others furiously taking notes. As John wrapped up his presentation, a hand rose from the back of the room. "I have a question," said a voice that made John's blood run cold. He squinted against the bright stage lights, trying to make out the face of the questioner. As the man stood up, John's worst fears were confirmed. It was Robert Caldwell, his former boss at the Wall Street firm, the same man who had fired him 3 years ago. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. John's mind raced. Would Caldwell expose his past? Would he destroy this chance before it even began? Caldwell's face was unreadable as he asked, "Mr. Smith, your idea is intriguing. But tell me, what makes you qualified to help people with their finances?" The question hung in the air, pregnant with unspoken history. John took a deep breath, his eyes meeting Caldwell's. In that moment, he made a decision. No more hiding, no more shame. 3 years ago, I lost everything, John began, his voice steady. I went from being a Wall Street trader to sleeping on the streets. I've experienced firsthand the financial struggles of those I aim to help. My past mistakes and my journey back from rock bottom have given me a unique perspective. I'm not just qualified to help, I'm obligated to. The room was silent for a beat, then erupted in applause. John saw something shift in Caldwell's expression. Was it respect? As John left the stage, he felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had laid it all out there, vulnerabilities and all. Whatever happened next, he knew he had been true to himself and his mission. The hours after the presentation were a blur of handshakes, business cards, and excited conversations. Investors were intrigued by John's story and the potential of Street Smart Finance. But one conversation stood out from the rest. "John," a familiar voice called. He turned to see Robert Caldwell approaching. "Mr. Caldwell," John replied, bracing himself. "That was quite a presentation," Caldwell said, his tone unreadable. "You've come a long way." John nodded, unsure of where this was going. "I'll be honest, when I saw your name on the list, I came here ready to shut you down," Caldwell continued. "But what you said up there, it's clear you're not the same man who left my office 3 years ago." He paused, then extended his hand. "My firm would like to be your first investor. What do you say we work together again, this time, to make a real difference?" John was speechless. Of all the outcomes he had imagined, this was not one of them. As he shook Caldwell's hand, he felt the weight of the past lifting from his shoulders. But the surprises weren't over yet. As John made his way through the crowd, he heard another familiar voice, one he hadn't heard in years. "John? Is that really you?" He turned to see Sarah, his ex-wife, standing before him. She looked different, gone were the designer clothes and perfectly styled hair. Instead, she wore a simple blouse and slacks, a name tag identifying her as a representative of a nonprofit organization. "Sarah," John said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" She smiled, a mix of emotions playing across her face. "I work for a nonprofit now. We help provide financial education to underserved communities. When I heard about this app that was causing a buzz, I never imagined it would be you behind it." As they talked, John learned that Sarah had gone through her own journey of self-discovery after their divorce. The loss of their fortune had led her to reevaluate her priorities, eventually finding purpose in helping others. "Your app," Sarah said, her eyes shining with excitement, "it could be a game changer for the people we work with. Would you consider partnering with our organization?" John couldn't help but laugh at the irony of it all. Here he was, standing with his ex-wife and his former boss, both of whom he had once seen as symbols of his failure. Now, they were offering to help make his dream a reality. In that moment, John realized that his journey had come full circle. The skills he had honed on Wall Street, the humility and empathy he had learned on the streets, and the purpose he had discovered through his struggles, all of it had led him to this point. As the weeks turned into months, Street Smart Finance went from an idea to a reality. With Caldwell's investment and Sarah's nonprofit expertise, the app quickly gained traction. It offered easy-to-understand financial education, microlending services, and a community support system for users. John found himself back in an office, but it couldn't have been more different from his Wall Street days. The Street Smart Finance headquarters was a bustling open-plan space, filled with a diverse team of developers, financial experts, and community outreach coordinators. The walls were adorned not with stock tickers, but with success stories of users whose lives had been changed by the app. 1 year after the fateful presentation, Street Smart Finance had helped thousands of people improve their financial situations. John, now CEO of his own company, stood at the podium of a community center in the very neighborhood where he had once been homeless. "Today, we're not just celebrating the success of an app," he began, looking out at the sea of faces, users, team members, investors, and yes, Frank from the soup kitchen sitting in the front row. "We're celebrating the power of second chances, the strength of community, and the idea that no matter how far we fall, we can always rise again." As applause filled the room, John couldn't help but reflect on the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment. From the heights of Wall Street to the depths of homelessness, and now to the helm of a company dedicated to helping others, it was a path he could never have imagined. The success of Street Smart Finance had surpassed even John's most optimistic projections. The app had not only helped individuals improve their financial literacy and access fair lending options, but it had also started to change the conversation around poverty and financial inclusion on a national level. John's story had caught the attention of media outlets, and he found himself being interviewed on talk shows and featured in business magazines. But unlike his previous brush with fame, this time he used the spotlight to shine a light on the issues that mattered most to him. "Our goal isn't just to help people manage their money," John explained in one particularly poignant interview. "It's to give them the tools and confidence to break the cycle of poverty. Every person who uses our app isn't just improving their own life, they're creating a ripple effect that can transform entire communities." As the company grew, John never forgot his roots. He made it a point to volunteer at the soup kitchen at least once a month, often bringing along team members to help out. It was during one of these sessions that he had a revelation that would take Street Smart Finance to the next level. While serving meals, John overheard a conversation between two regulars. They were discussing a predatory payday loan company that had recently opened in the neighborhood, targeting vulnerable individuals with astronomically high interest rates. That night, unable to sleep, John sketched out plans for a new feature of the app, a community-based lending system that would allow users to pool their resources and provide low-interest emergency loans to each other. It was a radical idea, one that would require careful implementation and oversight, but John was convinced it could work. The next morning, he called an emergency meeting with his team. As he explained his vision, he could see the excitement building in their eyes. This wasn't just a new feature, it was a way to directly challenge the systems that kept people trapped in cycles of debt. Implementing the new feature wasn't without its challenges. There were regulatory hurdles to overcome, skeptics to convince, and logistical issues to solve. But John's team rallied around the idea, working tirelessly to bring it to life. 6 months later, the community lending feature launched in beta. The results were immediate and inspiring. Stories poured in from users who had avoided financial catastrophe thanks to small, manageable loans from their peers. The default rate was surprisingly low, a testament to the power of community and shared responsibility. As Street Smart Finance continued to evolve and grow, John found himself facing a new challenge, balancing the demands of running a successful company with his commitment to its mission. There were tempting offers from larger tech firms looking to acquire the app, promising huge payouts that would have once been John's ultimate goal. But John remembered the lessons he had learned during his time on the streets. He knew that true fulfillment came not from wealth or status, but from making a real difference in people's lives. He turned down the offers, choosing instead to focus on expanding Street Smart Finance's reach to more communities in need. It was during this time that John received an unexpected phone call. It was from his parents, whom he hadn't spoken to in years. They had seen him on a national news program, talking about Street Smart Finance and his journey from homelessness to CEO. "Son," his father's gruff voice came through the line, thick with emotion, "we're so proud of you. Not because of your success, but because of the man you've become." The reconciliation with his parents was another piece of John's life falling back into place. He flew them out to New York, showing them around the Street Smart Finance offices and introducing them to his team. Seeing the pride in their eyes as they understood the impact of his work was a moment John would cherish forever. As Street Smart Finance approached its 3rd anniversary, John decided it was time to give back in an even bigger way. He announced the creation of the Street Smart Foundation, a nonprofit arm of the company dedicated to providing housing and job training for homeless individuals. The foundation's first project was the renovation of an abandoned building in the very neighborhood where John had once slept on the streets. It would be converted into a shelter and education center, offering a safe haven and a path forward for those who found themselves in the same situation John had been in years before. On the day of the center's grand opening, John stood before a crowd of community members, local officials, and media. As he prepared to cut the ribbon, he spotted a familiar face in the crowd, Frank, the man who had first encouraged him at the soup kitchen all those years ago. "This center," John began, his voice filled with emotion, "is dedicated to everyone who's ever felt lost, alone, or without hope. It's a reminder that rock bottom is not the end of your story, it can be the beginning of your greatest chapter." As the ribbon fell away and the crowd cheered, John felt a sense of completion. He had taken the darkest period of his life and transformed it into a force for good, touching countless lives in the process. But even as he celebrated this milestone, John knew that his work was far from over. There were still millions of people struggling with poverty and financial insecurity, and Street Smart Finance was just scratching the surface of what was possible. That night, as John sat in his office long after everyone else had gone home, he pulled out the old, dog-eared notebook he had kept from his days on the street. Flipping through the pages, he saw the desperate scribbles of a man who had lost everything, the first glimmers of the idea that would become Street Smart Finance, and all the steps in between. On the last page, he wrote a new entry. Today, we opened a door to hope for those who need it most. Tomorrow, we'll open another, and another after that. This journey has taught me that our greatest falls can lead to our greatest rises, not just for ourselves, but for all those we can lift up along the way. As he closed the notebook, John looked out at the city skyline. The lights of the buildings twinkled like stars, each one representing a life, a story, a potential for change. He thought about all the John Smiths out there, the ones still sleeping on park benches, in shelters, or in their cars. And he renewed his commitment to keep working, keep innovating, and keep believing in the power of second chances. The story of John Smith, from Wall Street titan to homeless man to visionary CEO, was more than just a tale of personal redemption. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the transformative power of empathy, and the idea that success can be measured not in dollars, but in lives changed. As Street Smart Finance continued to grow and evolve, John never lost sight of the lessons he had learned during his darkest days. He remained grounded, always ready to lend a hand to those in need, and continually pushing the boundaries of what financial technology could do to create a more equitable world. The app that had started as a dream scribbled in a tattered notebook had become a movement, sparking conversations about financial inclusion and poverty alleviation at the highest levels of government and business. John found himself invited to speak at conferences and policy forums, sharing his unique perspective on the intersection of technology, finance, and social responsibility. But for all the accolades and success, John's favorite moments were still the quiet ones, volunteering at the soup kitchen, mentoring young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds, or simply talking with users of the app about how it had changed their lives. 5 years after that fateful pitch meeting, Street Smart Finance had helped millions of people improve their financial situations. The community lending feature had facilitated over $1 billion in peer-to-peer loans, with a repayment rate that put traditional banks to shame. The Street Smart Foundation had opened centers in cities across the country, providing safe havens and new beginnings for thousands of homeless individuals. John's personal life had flourished as well. His relationship with Sarah, which had begun as a professional partnership, had blossomed into a deep friendship and eventually a rekindled romance. They had remarried in a small ceremony at the community center where Street Smart Finance had celebrated its first anniversary, surrounded by team members, app users, and yes, Frank from the soup kitchen, who had become something of a mascot for the company. As John prepared for another day at the office, he paused to look at a framed photo on his desk. It showed him sleeping in his car, taken by a passerby during his homeless days. He had tracked down the photo and the photographer, thanking them for capturing a moment that now served as a constant reminder of how far he had come and how much further there was to go. Next to it stood a more recent photo, John surrounded by a group of beaming graduates from the Street Smart Foundation's job training program, all of whom had secured employment and stable housing. These two images, side by side, told the story of a journey that was both deeply personal and universally resonant. They spoke of fall and redemption, of loss and discovery, of the power of second chances and the transformative potential of compassion. As John headed into another day of meetings, strategy sessions, and problem solving, he carried with him the lessons of his past and the hope for the future. He knew that his story, from Wall Street to the streets to the helm of a company changing lives, was still being written, with each new day bringing fresh challenges and opportunities to make a difference. And so, the man who had once had it all, lost everything, and found a new purpose, stepped out into the world ready to face whatever came next. For John Smith knew that true success wasn't measured in dollars or titles, but in the lives touched, the communities transformed, and the hope restored. His journey was a testament to the idea that it's not about how far you fall, but how high you rise, and more importantly, how many others you can lift up along the way. His journey was a testament to the idea that it's not about how far you fall, but how high you rise, and more importantly, how many others you can lift up along the way. What do you think about John's incredible journey from Wall Street to homelessness to successful CEO? Has his story inspired you or changed your perspective on second chances and financial inclusion? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below sharing your opinion or any personal experiences you've had with financial struggles and redemption. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of transformation and success against all odds. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these powerful narratives to light. Thanks for watching, and remember, no matter where you are in life, your next chapter could be your best one yet.